I'm sitting at my computer, soaking wet in the clothes I've been wearing all evening. I want to get this all down while I can still remember it perfectly. I say that like I'll ever be able to forget it. I was raised Baptist. I've lived in the Deep South for most of my life, and it was normal to be religious, even zealously so. I went to the usual activities: Bible vacation school, church camp, church 3 nights a week, sermons on Sundays, and until I went to college, I was pretty much a regular churchgoer. Once I left for college, kind of getting out of that environment, I kind of fell off, though. Suddenly, passing classes was a little more important than keeping up with my spiritual health. Suddenly, parties and dating were more important than my relationship with God. So I blinked one day and realized it had been almost 15 years since I'd been to church, and I thought I might like to experience it again. A quick Google search showed me a church in my area that wasn't too far out of town and seemed like it'd be a good fit for me. I saw from their community Facebook page that they were having an event on Saturday. Just a meet and greet for new members, bring a covered dish for the potluck, with a spiritual event to follow where new members could get baptized and join the church. I didn't have anything going on Saturday, so I thought that sounded pretty good. I made a macaroni casserole, one of the few things I actually knew how to make, and on Saturday, I sat at about 3 p.m. in my best church clothes. As I pulled up outside the church, I was worried that I might be a little underdressed in my button-up and work slacks. People were going in, men in suits, crisp white shirts, ladies in long dresses, and kids in the sort of Sunday school clothes I was used to seeing at different churches. Made me think there might be a dress code. I was new, though, and I figured that if I wasn't within that dress code, they'd let me know. So I took my dish and headed for the fellowship hall that was set off beside the church. I walked in the side door to a very familiar scene. The welcome was immediate and warm. A woman came to take my dish to the table as the pastor came to introduce himself as Pastor Marshall. I had expected a firm handshake and, to be left alone to mingle, but the pastor took me to each of the little groups there and introduced me to his congregation. I met his deacons, their families, the aldermen and their wives, the treasurer, the underpastors, and about 24 other families. I was escorted to the food table by some of the deacons and told which dishes were the best and which ones were best avoided. Miss Liz is a good woman, but there's quite a few eggshells in her dressing. And which had been made by eligible ladies of the church. Miss Conroy's daughter's about your age and makes a great pecan pie. I was spirited away to a table where I was bombarded with questions and anecdotes and given the usual church gossip. It was honestly a little like being home again. The church I'd belonged to in my childhood was very tight-knit, and as the kids ran around and the adults talked and laughed quietly, I felt a sense of homecoming wash over me. As the food was eaten and the plates were thrown away, we all moved into the worship hall for service. I sat on the front row with the 4 or 5 other new faces, and as Pastor Marshall mounted the pulpit, I couldn't help but smile. I felt a warmth in me, and I was already thinking about how I would have to change my schedule so I could come on Sundays and Wednesdays. As he laid out a sermon on acceptance and forgiveness, I began to reflect on my life here. It's hard not to when you've found somewhere you intend to stay for a while. In my mind, I would find fulfillment in the church, just like I had as a kid. I'd meet a nice girl, raise a family, grow old within the community where they would support me and my little ones. I know it sounds a little silly, but we all know the places that our mind goes during times like this. I see we have some new faces on the front bench tonight. Would any of you like to join our church and get baptized tonight? I stood up like a coal had been lit under me. I felt moved in a way that I never had to go to the altar, to renew my vows to God, and be washed clean in the baptismal font. The pastor smiled as he waved me up, and I had to stop myself from sprinting up the stairs. I was excited. I was in such a hurry to be part of this. I had no idea what I was in for. The pastor had me recite the affirmation, the renewal of my promise to God, and when he turned to indicate the space behind the pulpit, I realized they had an indoor baptismal pool. I'd never seen one of those before. We always did our baptisms in a nearby creek, but as he took my hand and led me towards it, I realized he meant to baptize me fully clothed. I fished the things out of my pocket that I didn't want to get wet, my phone, my keys, my wallet, etc., and set them on the stairs before stepping into the slightly warm water. I wouldn't normally have agreed to let my clothes get wet. I don't like being in wet clothes as a rule, but I was operating in a daze, and when he knelt to dip me, I felt my knees bending as I went down as well. I baptize you in the name of the Father, His Son, and the Holy Spirit. Good luck. I opened my mouth to ask why I would need luck, but as he dipped me back, my mouth was filled with water, and I was enveloped in the warm embrace of the pool. It didn't have the acrid smell of chlorine like I had thought it would. It was salty, actually, and that took me by surprise. I lay on my back beneath the water, waiting to be pulled back up, and when I opened my eyes, I realized that the hand was gone, and I was alone in the depths of the pool. The pool was suddenly deeper than I remembered it. The surface glimmered miles above me. The bottom was a shadowy depth beneath me, and I was floating in the depths like a diver. I started to panic, thinking I would drown, but the longer I sat beneath, the less I was worried. I was floating in the placid space, hovering in the placental moment, and I felt utterly at peace with the world and everything within it. I didn't notice that something was getting closer to me until it was almost too late. It began as a chill in the water, something that chased away the warmth of that pool. I opened an eye, looking to the far side, and saw a shadow rising from the distance. It was small at first, a black cloud that grew as it floated closer, but it grew wider as it came towards me. It was, I don't know. It was like something you see from the depths when you're still in the part of the water where the light can reach you. It was something I was afraid would take hold of me and drag me into the murk where I would be lost. Whatever it was, it filled me with a dread that I had never known before. As it continued to draw closer, I thought it might be a whale. I had thought at first that it might be a bank of darkness, but as it grew closer, I could see that the blackness was just how it looked. It seemed to exist inside its own fog of murk, and what I could see wasn't terribly pleasant. Its skin was gray, pebbly like a stony shore, and it appeared scaled or maybe ridged. Its eyes were huge, and the closer it got, the smaller I felt. It was massive, beyond the description of size or dimensions, and the closer it got, the less I wanted to be the focus of that attention. This must be what an ant felt like as it stood on a finger of a human, what an insect felt like before the frog devours it, and I could feel my whole body vibrating under the strain of its continued existence. It seemed to lean closer as it came up before me, our bodies inches from each other, and when it spoke, I could feel it in my bones. "Welcome back, my child." It reached out a massive finger, the print on the end looking like the indicators on a map. Even the end of that finger was bigger than my whole body, and it was like someone reaching out with a building to touch me. I closed my eyes, feeling it would obliterate me with that massive digit. But when it came into contact with my forehead, I was enveloped in a blinding light that burned me to a cinder. I came up gasping and thrashing from the depths, the pastor catching me as the congregation cheered. As their applause rose to envelop me, I looked down at the pool, expecting to see myself floating or standing on the edge of a lip, but the whole baptismal font was only about 2 feet deep. Standing up, I Could see the water wasn't even over my knees. The pastor looked up, still bent and kneeling at the bottom of the pool, and his expression was resplendent. Did he know what would happen? Did anything happen while I was floating in that abyss? The longer I stared at him, the longer I came to believe that he had known what would happen, and his eyes seemed to be trying to calm me as he stood and embraced me as a brother. As he did, I heard him whisper into my ear to be easy. Steady on, son, steady on. It's a little jarring at first, but it's all over now. Rejoice in the light, and be well. When I looked at him again, I could see a deeper understanding in his eyes, something I didn't know how I had missed before. When I looked out across the congregation, it was a look I saw mirrored in them as well. I was speechless, unsure of what to do, and when he led me out of the pool, it was all I could do not to break into a run. He offered me a towel, letting me stand shivering beside the pool as he asked the others if they wanted to come up. When the second man approached, seeming more hesitant than I had been, I grabbed my things and snuck out the choir entrance that led to the fellowship hall. It was empty now, the whole space covered in semi-shadow, and within that shadow, I could feel the regard of whatever had spoken to me in the depths. The next thing I knew, I was in my car and driving too fast from him. It was a miracle that I didn't get pulled over, though I briefly wondered who I had to thank for that. As I sit here now, my shaking has nothing to do with the cold. If this was the God of my father, the God I've been praying to all my life, then I think I'd rather be an atheist. Even as I sit here now, I can still imagine floating in that void as the ancient creature regards me kindly, its mind brushing against my own, and the dread threatening to overtake me again. I'd pray for oblivion, but I know what's waiting there for me now. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Final Thoughts. Final Thoughts would like to give our listeners a 10% discount on their premium package. Wouldn't you like the peace of mind of hearing from your loved ones just one last time? Well, at Final Thoughts, they can... Mark spooled the volume down as he waited for the commercial to end and his podcast to pick back up. He glanced out the window and was greeted by another sign for Final Thoughts. The company was barely a year old, and already they were everywhere. He turned the podcast back up, but wasn't really paying attention anymore. The traffic moved sluggishly around him, like an artery clogged with plaque. He just knew that it would make him late for dinner, and then Lisa would be upset. She hated it when he was late for dinner. The words of the host were cut off suddenly, as his phone chirped and displayed Lisa's picture on the screen. Mark sighed. She was probably calling to ask when he'd be home. She wouldn't be happy when he told her he was going to be late. He'd worked late every day this week, and she had probably made a big surprise dinner for Friday. He considered ignoring it, but knew that would just lead to a bigger fight. He caught it on the fifth ring. "Hey, hun," he said, trying to sound chipper. "Hi, sweetie." Her voice put Mark on edge. They'd been married almost 7 years, and he'd learned how to read her reasonably well in the early parts of the relationship. Her voice was high, unnaturally sweet, and he could already tell that something was wrong. This was the voice she used when she was upset and trying not to show it, when she had bad news but didn't want to tell it. He almost thought he could hear her holding back tears, but didn't want to say so. "Lisa, is everything okay?" How was your day? Did you make any big sales?" That took Mark aback. Lisa wasn't usually interested in his work. "Yeah, I made a few big sales. Mr. Copeland said I'm likely a shoo-in for Employee of the Month." That's fantastic, dear. I'm so proud of you." When she said it, there was a slight wince at the end of the word, and Mark could still swear that she was trying not to cry. She was acting strangely. What was going on over there? As Mark sat in bumper-to-bumper traffic, he couldn't help but imagine that someone with a gun was in his house, telling his wife to call him. Maybe someone had died, Mark thought, and she was trying not to tell him until he got home. As the car ahead moved, Mark took his foot off the brake and accelerated forward enough to stop again. Just up ahead, he could see a road worker holding a sign. This was the gatekeeper for a stretch of road laden with roadmen and trucks. This was the source of the traffic, and Mark cursed loudly, realizing that this would take the better part of an hour to get through. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Lisa asked, in that same overly chipper voice that verged on breaking. "Oh, it's road work, babe. Looks like I won't be home for dinner for at least an hour." She made a sound, and to Mark it sounded like a sob. "Oh, I'm sorry, hon. I was hoping you were a little closer. I had something I needed to tell you." Her words broke apart as she spoke, and Mark was getting kind of worried about what was going on at home. "Lisa, is something wrong? You sound like you're barely able to stop yourself from crying. What's going on?" "I promise you won't get mad. I don't want the last thing I hear to be the sound of you mad." Her words sent a chill through him. "The last thing you hear? What are you talking about?" She paused for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully before continuing. "Mark, honey, there was an accident." "An accident? What happened?" A car beeped at him, and Mark jittered forward a little bit. He had expected to hear that someone had died, that dinner was burnt, maybe that there was a bill that had come in and it was really bad. He had thought maybe there was a home invader or a kidnapping plot. He had thought of 1,000 different things, but her being hurt was never one of them. Lisa rarely left the house. When she did, it was always to her destination and back again. Lisa's parents had been killed in a car accident about 10 years ago, and it had all but made her a shut-in. "I don't want to talk about it. Can't we just make our last conversation a happy one? I don't want you to remember me like this after I'm gone," she said, finally breaking down. Mark could hear her crying on the other end, and the sound was too much. When the car beeped at him this time, he ignored it. Mark had already stripped off his seatbelt and was climbing out of his vehicle. The driver blared his horn and yelled at him, but Mark didn't care. He was running up the sidewalk, phone pushed against his ear, as he ran for their apartment. His apartment wasn't far from the office, but he always drove because he didn't want to arrive with his suit smelling of sweat in the street. He had always considered the 30 minutes to an hour it took him to get home as his time. Now he just wanted to get home before his wife breathed her last. "What happened, dear? Just keep talking to me." Her voice was becoming weaker, but he craved it like a starving man wants a slice of bread. I was dusting the lights. I dust them every Friday. They get so dirty during the week. I was up on a stepladder, and I guess one of the brackets snapped. I fell and hit my head on the table. I saw the blood on the floor and knew it was bad. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm such a klutz." "Don't be sorry," he said as he ran up the street. People moved out of his way or they were knocked aside. A woman fell on the curb, and her angry voice followed Mark as he ran. Mark passed a policeman, and the man tried to stop him. He juked around him and kept running. His apartment was only 3 blocks away, and he knew he could make it. "I'm scared, Mark." That gave him a burst of speed. Just hold on. I'm almost there," he huffed as he ran across the street, the sound of horns blaring behind him. I feel cold. Please, stay with me, Lisa," he almost cried, tears dripping down his face onto the phone. He could see their apartment building as it loomed in the distance. The gray facade had never looked better to him, and he knew it was only a block away. He ran flat out, his suit coat billowing behind him, his button-up hanging long around his waist. He looked crazed, but he didn't care. He was going to see her. He was going to save her. He was going to be there for her. "Mark," she gasped. Her voice had become as fragile as glass. "I'm here, honey. There's an ambulance outside the complex, as well as several police cars. What's going on? Has someone called for help? Why didn't you say so? I just wanted to let you know my time's almost up." His breath hitched in. Don't talk like that. We'll have more time. I see paramedics outside. They must be here for you." "No, they've already come and got me, Mark." He stopped as he watched them roll out a gurney with a black bag on it. The bag was zipped up, the contents not moving. The paramedics loaded it into the back of an ambulance and closed the door. They rolled away without ever seeing Mark at all. "You're hearing my voice because I signed up for Final Thoughts. I know you don't like them, but I wanted you to have some closure if something ever happened to me. I remember how much it messed me up when my parents died, and I never got to say goodbye. I've only got about a minute left, Mark, but I want to tell you that I love you, and I'll always love you." Mark stood on the sidewalk as the cold numbness rushed over him. He was hearing her voice for the last time. She was already gone, already dead, and now he was listening to the last words she would ever say. This was grisly. It was a joke. How could they put a time limit on how long he could spend with his wife? "Mark," she whispered, her voice a thin edge of dandelion fluff. He swallowed his emotion. This was his wife's final moments. He didn't want them to be meaningless. I love you too, Lisa. I've always loved you." "Goodbye, Mark. I love you," she whispered. She sounded happy. The line went dead. My parents moved when I was a senior in high school. Not all at once, they moved in stages, and I was allowed to watch the house while they took their things a little at a time to their new house. This was great for me because I had a steady girlfriend and a group of friends who would regularly stay at the house with me. My parents had a huge house, and as long as I didn't wreck it, they didn't really care what I did. As long as I cut the grass and fed the dogs, they sent me money for groceries and let me carry on. It was a very interesting time in my life, and it lasted until I was nearly 20. By the time they were ready to move, my life had kind of fallen apart. My girlfriend had met someone at work, and I caught her cheating, and told her that we were done. My friends either started college or started jobs, and didn't really have time for hanging out at a friend's house who did nothing but watch his parents home. I saw less and less of them, and had less and less company to speak of, so when my parents made me the offer to come with them, I did. There wasn't a lot for me to do in my old town, so I packed up and moved to this place. They had been slowly transitioning into for the last 2 years. The house was actually a lot nicer than the one that they had moved out of. The old house had been big, but it was old and in disrepair. The yard was also pretty large and required a lot of mowing, even in the winter months, given where we lived. The new house was just as big, but had a stone fireplace and hardwood floors and a much smaller yard than the old house. My brother, a few years younger than me, enjoyed the new school, and my parents had moved into new jobs in the community. They told me that it would be much easier for me to start college here, but until then, I could get a job in town to supplement my income. It all sounded fine to me, so I settled into one of the upstairs rooms, and that was where I saw the ghost. Ghost might be too grand a term. It wasn't some spectacular phantasm or some dripping corpse moaning up the halls. It looked like one of the cheap ghosts from a low-budget movie, but it was certainly enough to scare the bejesus out of me. The first couple of nights I spent in the house, I was too tired to do much besides moving my things and falling into bed. The third night, however, was a little different. I had spent the third day in town looking for work and had figured that I was going to have a harder time finding work here than my parents. Unless I wanted to work in retail or fast food, I was going to need to look somewhere else, but that was fine with me. I'd seen on the television that there were a couple of hospitals the next town over, and they were always looking for someone to work in IT or at the switchboard. So that night, I fell into bed, but woke up a little after midnight to a strange sound in my room. My room was huge. It was 12 by 15, with a bed and a desk and a closet, but there was only one window, and it was facing out on the front yard. That time of night, the moon was coming in to light the section of floor where I had laid a rug and a coat rack, and that was where I saw it. At first I thought it might be one of the coats I had hung on the rack, but when it turned, I knew it was something a little different. It looked like a girl, about 15 or 16, made out of TV static. She was looking around, calling for her mother, and hadn't seemed to have noticed me at all. I lay in bed, full of fear and wondering just what the hell was going on, when she suddenly looked at the door and her sorrow turned into fear. She started to shake, backing away from something, and before she disappeared, she screamed and vanished in a puff of static. It was the strangest thing that I'd ever seen, and as I laid there in bed, I think I convinced myself that I had just imagined it or it was a dream. I had never had any trouble believing in the paranormal before, but this felt different somehow. This felt like a video or a projection, and I wasn't sure I really believed in it as something other than that. It was just a dream, some trick of the light, nothing more, and I rolled over as I faced the wall and tried to get back to sleep. The next night, however, I woke up around the same time with a tickling feeling on the back of my neck. I was facing the wall that night, sleeping pretty soundly, when all of a sudden it was like insects crawling across my skin. I slapped at my neck, and when I did not get the crunch of an insect, I turned over to check behind me. There she was again, the girl that I had seen the night before. She was standing in roughly the same place and mouthing fearfully at something that I couldn't see. She did this for a minute before turning our way and disappearing again. 2 nights in a row made it a little harder to push away as a dream or my imagination. I took my blanket and went to one of the other bedrooms upstairs, and thankfully I wasn't bothered by ghosts in any of them. I thought about just moving my stuff into one of the other rooms. My parents had said that I could have the old bunk room, but they hadn't said that I had to stay there. Still, I was curious now. This is some kind of mystery, and I really wanted to know how it ended. So the next day, when my mom got up to start cooking breakfast, she found me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. "Mom, are there any ghosts in this house?" Mom laughed, and that immediately put me at ease. "No, sweetie. The house was only built 20 years ago, and no one has died in it in those 2 decades. Unless you're seeing some kind of ghosts from the land, there certainly aren't any in the house." Some of you may be skeptical, but if my mom said that there's no ghosts in the house, then I believe her. Mom is one of those ghost hunter fanatics. She watches the shows, she goes on ghost tours, and she generally believes in most of the spooky stuff that you see on TV. It's not just that she believes in Bigfoot and aliens, and I'm pretty sure that Mulder is her spirit animal. So, for her to tell me so distinctly that there were no ghosts made me think that I must have been wrong. I must have had a bad dream, like I thought. I decided to go back to the bunk room. It had the best light during the day and the best access to air conditioning, and went about my day as usual. I stayed up a little bit late that night, playing games with some people online and generally goofing off. So when I felt that tickle on the back of my neck again, I looked and saw the ghost girl standing not too far behind me. I nearly fell out of my chair, and some of the language I used probably would have made my parents pretty unhappy. She was still standing there, cringing and talking, but saying nothing. Then, after about 10 to 15 minutes, she disappeared, and I was in an empty room again. When Mom came downstairs that morning and found me at the table again, she laughed loud enough to make my dad ask if she was okay. "What's wrong, kid? Ghosts keeping you up again?" "Kinda," I told her, and I told her what had happened. She listened. Like I said, Mom was really into all the ghost hunting stuff, but after I finished, all she could do was shrug. "I don't know what to tell you. The realtors have to disclose if anyone died in the house, at least for the last 10 years, and I asked. You know me, I've always wanted to live in my own little haunted house, and the lady assured me that no one had died in the home, so no ghosts, though it wasn't for a lack of trying." I thought about that for a moment. Well, what happened to the previous owners of the house? Mom turned her back on me so that she could stir grits and seemed to contemplate how much to tell me. "Well, from what the realtor told us, the family that lived here before us built the house and another house in the valley below it. The down below is technically ours. We just don't know what we're going to do with it yet. There used to be a house down there, but it burned down before the family that built the house moved out." "But what happened to the family?" "She didn't say," Mom said, "but she did tell us that no one had died in the house that anyone was aware of." I thought about it, but realized that she had omitted something. What about the house that used to be in the down below? Mom was quiet, and then I guess she decided to stop being so cagey. The family that lived there died in the fire, and the fire was set under some pretty mysterious circumstances. I don't really want to talk about this first thing in the morning. It's kind of a sad topic to start the day with. I decided to let it go for now, but I also thought it might be time to do some research. I had the day off, no applications to put in or financial aid to seek, so I went to the library and decided to see if I could find any information about my parents' new home. There was a little bit in the local paper. It talked about the house fire that had killed the Maynard family, Mr. and Mrs. Maynard and their young daughter, but it didn't mention much else besides the fact that Mr. Maynard had a brother. The article didn't say too much about him, but I suppose that he could have been the one that built the house. There was nothing else in the paper about the incident or occurrences at my parents' house, so I decided it might be time to speak to the source. The small town my parents had moved to was little more than a 2-stoplight town, but they had a small paper that ran the local events and a small bit of local gossip. The town crier had an editor and 2 writers on staff, and when I asked who had done the story about the fire at the Maynard house, they directed me to a man with thick glasses and a tweed jacket. He looked more like an English professor than a column writer, and after shaking my hand and hearing what I was after, he looked like I had force-fed him a lemon. Yes, the Maynard fire was a tragedy, to be sure. Happened almost 10 years ago, and it was one of the first stories I covered. Did you have some questions about it or something? I told him my parents had bought the other house on the lot, and I was looking for information about the previous owners. He took his glasses off and wiped them, but it amounted to the same thing that my mother had told me. He was stalling, trying to figure out the best way to tell me something that he didn't want me to know, and trying to figure out how much of it to tell me so that I would go away. There was more than just a house fire here, and I was beginning to suspect that it was something the town didn't want to talk about. Let me give you a piece of advice. This is one sleeping dog you need to let lie. It happened a long time ago, and the people involved are just trying to get on with their lives. Leave it alone, for the good of those that are still alive. I thanked him for his time and his candor, but I think his warning just made me more interested. I decided to swing by the realty office to talk to the woman who had sold them the house, and they had a few more people than the paper. The realtor, Marjorie, was out, but I told them I'd wait, and after about 20 minutes, she came back and handed the receptionist some papers before the woman pointed me out. Marjorie smiled, but I got the feeling that she didn't really want to talk to me either. You must be one of the new owners of the Maynard place. I hope everything is going well. I assured her that my parents were very happy with the house, but I was looking for a little more info on the place. I lied and told her that I'd found something written on the inside of a closet, and I was just curious about the previous owners. When she asked what I had found, I told her it was gibberish, and I was just wondering if someone was in the occult or something. No, not that I know of. The Maynards left about 6 months after the fire, but their daughter was normal enough from what I remember. So do they still live in town then? I'm sorry, that's not something I'm at liberty to talk about. Regardless, the Maynard family is fine, and I don't think you should bother them, if that's what you intend to do. They have suffered a lot after the fire, and they'd rather be left in peace. She seemed to realize that she had said too much after she finished, and excused herself, saying that she needed to get back to work. I left the realty company, feeling like I'd taken 1 step forward and 5 steps back. I had more questions than answers, but I was really wondering if I could get to the bottom of this. Ghost girls aside, this mystery had its hooks in me, and I felt like the town had a vested interest in keeping something a secret. I headed back to the library, trying to find the threads again, and that's when I remembered what the writer had said. He said the fire had happened about 10 years ago, and the realtor had said they moved out of the house less than a year later. If the Maynard kids had gone to school around here, maybe I could find something with those dates and years. It was vague, and it made me feel a little creepy, but It was all I had to run with. It took a while, and I think the librarian thought I was a weirdo, but I finally discovered something. A news article about a local fundraiser had made me feel cold as a picture of the students involved scuttled across. It was the 4-H Club's annual farm auction, something they did in the spring. Now, one of the smiling girls was hugging a lamb and looking into the camera with frozen joy. It was the same girl from my nightly haunting, and the name underneath gave me a name to go along with the face. Stacy Maynard, 15, poses with her prized winning lamb, Chumley. The realtor had let it slip that they lived in town, so a quick search of the yellow pages, and I discovered that she had been right. She was still in town, living in the Masterly Hedge Apartments. And after Googling the address, I worried over the idea of talking to her. Everyone else in town had turned me down cold when I kept up my questions, so who knew what this woman would say when I asked her? I tapped my pen as I looked at the address, finally deciding to give it a shot. What did I have to lose, right? She was out on her porch when I pulled up, the little patio off the side of the apartment, holding quite a few plants. She was watering them, her blonde hair sticking out the back of her baseball cap, and she looked up as I approached. She looked a lot like the girl from my room, the way a mother might look like their child, and I think she saw something on my face as she asked if she could help me. She looked like the realtor and the writer, polite but apprehensive. I was hoping to talk to you about something. It's going to sound strange, but you've been haunting my house. She raised an eyebrow at me, laughing nervously. That's a new one, but it's still a pretty sloppy pickup line. No, I'm sorry, I'm making a mess of this. Did you used to live at 563 Sorora Street? That seemed to make her nervous. Yeah? Why? My family lives there now. I stay in the upstairs room, the one with the window facing the front of the house, and every night there's a ghost girl that looks a lot like you. She stays for a few minutes, she never says anything, and then she disappears. The longer I went on, the less impressed the woman looked. Uh-huh. Okay, well, I think it's time for you to go now. This is all very interesting, but I'm not really interested in whatever this is. She started to go back inside, and I tried my best to find something to prove I wasn't just being a creep. The girl looks like she's about 15, and she looks terrified. She keeps calling for her mother while she watches the door. She looks absolutely terrified. I just wanted to know why she was so scared. She had been halfway through the door, but she stopped, and she turned around to look at me. How do you know that? No one would be able to know that. I was by myself that night, but she shook her head, realizing what she had said. She stood there for a moment, contemplating what to do with this stranger that had wandered up all of a sudden, before finally deciding to invite me in. Sit here on the porch, she said, as she headed inside. I'm going to get tea. I feel like I need something stronger, and I'm out of everything but cooking sherry. I parked it on one of the plastic chairs that she had on the porch, and when she came back with a jug of tea and 2 glasses, I thanked her. You aren't the first person to come to talk to me. What happened was a town secret, but there were definitely people who wanted the real story. I swore I'd never talk about it again, but it kind of feels like you're part of this, and that's not your fault. So I'm going to tell you what happened, and when I'm done, I don't want to talk about it again. Do you understand? After this, I don't want to talk about this ever again. I nodded, taking a sip of tea as she emptied her own glass and refilled it. Okay, so my dad and my uncle got the land from my grandpa. They had shared it, and my uncle wanted to build his house in the valley, while Daddy wanted to put a house on the hill. They were co-owners in a moving company, and they were doing pretty well. They were close, thick as thieves, but they couldn't have been more different. My uncle was a loving man, affectionate and supportive, but Daddy was a monster. He made life hell for my sister and my mother, but but especially for me. I was his oldest daughter, and I seemed to get the brunt of his anger. He beat us. He yelled at us. He did... She closed her eyes and shook a little. Other things to us, but we were all too scared to say anything to anyone. But that's not why you're here, though. But I guess it is, too. That moment you're talking about was one of the last times he hurt me. The time before someone did something about it. She looked at the tea glass, watching the ice cubes rattle around before continuing. Daddy and my uncle were fighting a lot before he died. He found out that Daddy had been taking money from the business, and he wanted him to give it back. Daddy refused, but my uncle had threatened to turn him into the police or something. I heard only snippets of their fight, or fights over the phone, that I only got one part of. But one night, Daddy decided to do something about it. I remember waking up to see my uncle's house burning, but I think I knew he was already dead. Daddy had killed him, killed my aunt and my cousin too, and I think the town knew it too. They couldn't prove it. Daddy had covered his tracks, but they remembered when he was younger, and they knew he was a monster when he grew up to be a bigger monster. They had seen the bruises on my mother and on us, and they had seen the animals dumped in the gutter near his house sometimes, and they knew it couldn't go on much longer. Then one night, he gave them their reason. Mom was at work. I'd come home early from a 4-H event, and Daddy was waiting for me. He asked what I'd been doing, asked why I was out so late, and when I told him, he called me a liar and a lot of other things. He tried to put his hands on me, and I had a momentary lapse in sanity. Maybe not. Maybe I just had had enough of being beaten, but regardless, I pulled away and ran upstairs. I slammed the door, pushed the dresser in front of it, and just screamed for my mother. I was terrified of what I had done. I knew that when he got inside, he was going to really let me have it this time. He was going to beat me, and there was nothing I could do about it. I called out for my mom. I begged her to come home and save me, but when the door opened with a crash, I couldn't do anything but hunker against the wall and accept my punishment. It wasn't punishment, though. It was just violence. I think that was when I realized that he was never actually punishing me, never delivering anything for my own good, and I slipped into unconsciousness. That didn't stop him, though. I woke up in the hospital, my mom crying as she told me how sorry she was, promising that nothing like this would ever happen again. I found out later that she had come home to find me unconscious. My dad was downstairs watching TV like nothing had happened, while I lay in a puddle of blood and fought for my life. She called an ambulance, and the police had been called, and my daddy was arrested. They took him to jail, and he claimed that he had done nothing. They had no proof that he had beaten me, no more proof than they had that he had burned down my uncle's house and killed his family. But the people of the town were tired of suffering him. While I was in the hospital, a mob came to the house and took him away. I don't know what they did to him, and I don't want to know, but he never bothered us again. He'd killed his brother and gotten away with it, and he'd beaten his wife and children for years, and they had ignored it. But putting me in the hospital seemed to be their tipping point. So that's what happened. I don't know why you can see it, but that was the moment that caused it. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves and the potted plants whisper. And when I thanked her for the tea, I took my leave. To this day, I don't know why the girl appears in the room every night, but knowing what brought it on, I also don't much care. I've been back to visit Miss Maynard a few times since, and we've become pretty good friends. I also moved my stuff into the room across the hall, and I'm happy to report that no phantoms take up residence in there, at least not that I've found. I don't know if the wood in the room is so porous that it soaks up memories, or if what happened that night was so terrible that it made an impression, but the girl, to my knowledge, still appears around midnight before disappearing. I've slept sounder since I moved across the hall, and I have no intention of moving back. I can't explain it, But he's been here the whole time. No one believed me. My wife thought I was insane. But he's been here the whole time. My son, Dale, was 5 when he went missing. We were at the park by our flat when it happened. Park may be too grand a word for it, but that's what Dale always called it. In reality, it was a big plastic play structure with a couple of slides, a climbing wall, and a sand pit. The whole thing is surrounded by a 15 by 15 fence with a couple of benches for parents to sit on inside. That's where I sat that day, scrolling through Reddit and finishing my cigarette. Dale was playing with a couple of neighborhood kids, their parents sitting on the other benches, so they didn't have to breathe in my smoke. I looked up in time to see him go beneath the play structure, into an area they call the cave. The cave is an enclosed area beneath the structure, with a roof that was comfortably close for a kid and downright claustrophobic for an adult. I heard my phone chirp and looked back down to see a text from my wife. She'd gotten home from work and wanted Dale and me to come help with the groceries. I pitched my cigarette over the fence and called for Dale. "Come on, Dale. Mom's waiting for us." No response. "Come on, Dale. If you can't listen, we won't be able to come back tomorrow." Usually this would have brought him running. Playing outside was his favorite pastime, but there was still no answer. Both of his playmates came out the other side, giggling and laughing as they acted out whatever game they were playing, and I asked if they'd seen Dale. Alicia, a dark-haired girl who was missing her front teeth, lisped, "He's still in the cave, Mr. Darwith." So I hunkered my nearly 6-foot frame, looked into the dark underbelly of the play structure, and called for Dale to come out. "Come on, Dale, we really have to go. Mom's waiting on us." I still didn't think anything was amiss, other than Dale trying to squeeze in a few more minutes of playtime. I expected him to giggle and poke his head out, baiting me into chasing him or crawling into the cave. He knew that as big as I was, it would be funny to watch me try to get under the structure and run him out, a game we played often. Instead, there was only silence. So I sighed and hunkered down on the damp sand to crawl under to get him. I heard the other two parents chuckle as they watched me, my back scraping at the bottom of the structure as I crawled towards the entrance to the cave. I didn't mind playing with Dale, but this was a little much. I was tired from my night shift the day before, and my back was sore from lifting freight all night. I resigned myself to having a stern talking to with him on the way home about not listening and crawled into the dark opening of the cave. As I passed from the lighted world outside, the afternoon sun cut slants across my face through the boards of the structure as I entered the darkness of the cave. I felt a crawling sensation on my neck suddenly. Thought I might have picked up a spider, and I ran a hand over to knock him off. There was nothing there, but the feeling wouldn't abate. It felt like my hackles were up, that ancient feeling of predators nearby putting me on edge, and it took everything I had to keep dragging myself through the space. It was only about 5 feet of blackness, but the space was preternaturally dark. It was the weirdest I had felt in years. Was it always this dark in here? I'd crawled through here before, but I didn't remember it being this black. Worse still, I didn't feel like I was alone in here. Of course I'm not alone, I reminded myself. I came in here to get Dale. As I crawled through, I began to doubt that he was still in here, and the sense that something else lived here wouldn't so easily be put aside. I felt like something hateful lived here, something that was even now hungry and slobbering. My goal went from getting Dale to getting the hell out of the space, and I came out the other side, expecting to be dragged back and consumed any minute. I stood up, wiping the dirt off my knees, as the air puffed out of me loudly. It could have easily been mistaken for exertion, but I'd be a fool to pretend it was anything but fear. I expected my son to pop out and laugh at his silly old dad then, but he was still nowhere to be found. "Dale?" I called, my voice becoming fearful after what I'd experienced. "Dale!" The other parents looked up, hearing the jagged quality of my voice, and rose to see if everything was okay. I can't find my son," I told them, and they told me not to panic as we searched the structure. My wife came walking up just as I started getting frantic, and she must have sensed my concern as she caught sight of me. She called the police then, and as I ran to check the woods, I heard her say that hateful phrase for the first time. "Our son's gone missing. Please send help." Half an hour later, 2 cars pulled up and a couple of officers came to render assistance. I had searched behind the flats, in the scraggy woods nearby, around the little retention pond that I always told Dale to keep away from, and was just about to start knocking on doors when I saw them. They wanted to talk to me being the last to see Dale, and the officer in charge sent 2 of his men to check nearby houses as they asked me questions for the next few minutes. Where had I seen him? What was he wearing? Was there anyone suspicious around? Who were his mates? Where might he have gone off to? Did he run away often? And all the time they assured me that they would find him, and not to panic. I answered their questions honestly, but I knew that he couldn't have left the play park. Dale was small for his age. I told them so, and despite all my misgivings with the flat we lived in, they had done one thing that I thanked them for. The clasp on the gate was too heavy for a little tyke to push up. Dale had struggled with it before, but I knew he couldn't have left without help. The other parents said they hadn't seen him come out or seen anyone lurking around the playground that day. So the police searched. They searched the play park, the surrounding flats, the woods, and the whole area, basically retreading the ground I had already walked. As night began to fall, they called in more officers and began to canvass the wider area. My wife and I were distraught. Dale was our first and only child, but as the day stretched on, it seemed less and less likely that they would find him. I'm not ashamed to say that I took Dale's disappearance poorly. My wife was stoic through it all, but I knew she was hurting. He was her baby, and she had carried him for 9 months, but I think she held a lot of her sorrow in because she saw me floundering. I became like a ghost in my own home. Eventually I went back to work, but my performance suffered. It only takes a little effort to load things onto a truck, but I was falling behind, missing quotas, and making trucks late. The supervisor was a mate from primary school, fortunately for me, and he saw that I wasn't doing well. He suggested counseling and told me it might help, but I didn't want to tell some stranger about my problems. A year passed, my wife and I growing distant as the days went by, and as the anniversary of Dale's disappearance drew closer, I finally really screwed things up at work. I can't even say that it wasn't my fault, because it absolutely was. I was operating a lift, something I'd done since I got certified at 19, and as I backed out with a load, I hit a riser. It wasn't a hard hit, just a bump really, but the legs on that particular riser, as it turned out, were getting ready to give way. The riser collapsed in spectacular fashion, and when it fell on one of my co-workers. He lived. They managed to get the pallets off of him before they crushed him, but it broke his collarbone, and he had to be hospitalized. My supervisor was furious, but I could tell he was trying to hold back in the face of my sincere grief. "I'm recommending you take a couple of weeks unpaid leave. If it were anyone else, I'd hand them their walking papers here and now, but I know you need help more than you need a trip to the unemployment line. Take these 2 weeks, sort your life out, and return to work. If this happens again, mate, I ain't gonna have a choice." I couldn't look at him. His pity was worse than his anger, and I knew I needed to do something. I nodded, mumbling a thank you, and he showed me out of his office. I walked around for the rest of the night, trying to figure out what I was going to tell my wife, and finding nothing. She would be mad, probably mad enough to push her to leave me. But as the sun started to peek over the horizon, I knew there wasn't much else I could do. She was just as mad as I'd thought she'd be, but her pity was just as hard to look at as my supervisor's had been. He's gone. Dale is gone, and making yourself a martyr over it won't change the fact. You still have insurance. Get some counseling. Figure this out. I need you back. Not just back at work, but back here. I miss him too, but digging into these wounds won't make it any better. Get some help, for both our sakes." There was something unsaid beneath that statement, and I understood it, but wasn't sure what to do about it. I spent the next 4 days in a blackout state. I had found my therapy at the bottom of a bottle, something I had avoided up to that point. With no job to go to, I just stayed at home and drank my pain away. My wife's patience finally ran out. After 2 days of watching me hunker on the couch like a sot, she told me she was going to see her mother for a few days, and suggested I sort myself out while she was gone. If I come home and you're still like this, I can't promise I'll be back for long. Once she was gone, I spent most of my day in a fermented haze. That's how, on the 5th day, I found myself buzzed and sitting on the same bench I had been on when I told Dale we needed to leave. It was early afternoon, and the play park was empty, thank God. It wasn't the first time I had just come to sit here, and the other parents often found excuses to leave with their kids when I came to wallow in my grief. I was the sad father who came back to the place he'd suffered most, and I really hoped the park had been empty when I got here. Even in my current state, I didn't want anyone to see me like this. It was embarrassing, and it might frighten some of the children if I came weaving into the park smelling like a distillery. I was staring at the play structure, thinking to myself that it might be time to get some help after all. When I first saw it, it was just 8 words, but those 8 words sobered me up faster than any cold shower ever could. On the side of the slide, in rough marker, someone had written, "Where have you gone, Daddy? I miss you." I just sat there, staring for what felt like an eternity, and as the tears came, the alcohol came up as well. My tears fell nakedly into the pile of sick that sat between my legs, and as the rage bubbled up in me, it felt like they were almost burned away. Someone was mocking me, mocking my son's loss, and as I staggered towards the super's office, I was madder than I had any right to be. Mr. Vidner, the super for the complex, always reminded me of one of the hobbits from The Lord of the Rings. He was short, fat, had a curly brown ring of hair around the bald spot on his crown that got bigger every year, and when he sat at his desk, it was like a child sitting in his father's chair. He nearly fell out of that chair when I slammed his office door, his expression of confused anger becoming one of confused fear as he looked on my face. He was a small man, and the sight of a large, angry drunk in his office reminded him of his stature rather quickly. "Someone has written hateful graffiti on your play park, and I want to know what you intend to do about it." He took a minute or two to collect his thoughts before asking what the hell I was talking about. I took him out to have a look, leading him to the slide in question, and he looked taken aback as he read the words. "Who would do such a thing?" he asked, more to himself than anyone. The way he side-eyed me, I could tell he thought I might have done it myself, but one look at my face made him rethink it before he said it. "I'll take care of it immediately, Mr. Dawes. In the meantime, why don't you go get some rest? You look under the weather." He had the decency not to call me a drunk out in the open, and I conceded the matter as I went home to sober up a little. As night began to fall, some undetermined amount of time later, I sat up from the couch and listened to the 5 or 6 stout cans rattle angrily to the floor. By the headache and the mealy taste in my mouth, I had not gone home and sobered up. As I moved into the kitchen to make something for dinner, I remembered the words on the slide and felt angry all over again. As the meat pie I had taken out of the freezer spun in the microwave, I wondered if Vidner had taken care of it like he said he would. I wondered if he'd painted over it or washed it away or how he had done it. Were the words still sitting there on that slide? As the microwave dinged, I resolved to go find out, and took my pie and plastic fork on a little field trip. I watched the steam roll off the top as I walked down to the little park, the night air alive with crickets and night birds. It would have been pretty if I hadn't been in such despair. The trees were losing their autumn leaves, becoming bare and skeletal, and the air was crisp enough to make my undershirt unadvisable. My bare feet slapped at the concrete as I walked away from my flat, and the closer I got, the better the view of the offending slide. The words were gone, the pressure washer having left the slide a little lighter for its effort, but as I came through the gate, I saw that something else had been added to the side of the structure. It looked like the same marker strokes, the handwriting big and childish, and as I read it, I felt a growl rumble in my throat. I saw you today, Daddy. I saw you, but you didn't see me. I looked around as the wind rattled the nearby tree, expecting to see a group of snickering youths as they watched me. This had teenagers written all over it, and as the pie slipped out of my hand, I loosed my shout at the sky. Why? Why did they devil me like this? Was this a game to them? When I was a kid, we would never have done something like this to anyone, let alone a grieving father. The dark offered up no answers, but the side of the play park did when I turned back. Beneath the first message, another, smaller message was written in the same childish scrawl. The longer I looked at it, the more I recognized it. How many times had I watched my son scribble words in his reader just that way, filling in the workbook pages in big, looping script as he prepared to go to kindergarten. Daddy, I can see you, but you can't see me. Please help me. It's scary here. I hunkered on my knees in the sand, looking at the words as I ran my fingers over them. They looked just like his, and as I felt a splinter catch in the pad of my thumb, I pulled it back sharply. There was no way he could be here. There was no way that he could have been hiding here for a year. But as I watched the playset, I had no doubt that he had written those words. Dale, I said, my voice quavery as I glanced into the shadowy depths of the playground. Dale, I shouted a little louder, casting around as I tried to find him. I walked around to the other side, stumbling in the gritty sand as it sucked at my feet. My head was full of rails, and my words slurred even to my own ears. There were doubtlessly people looking down through their curtains at me as I capered like a sot drunk, but I didn't care. My boy was here. He was here somewhere, and I needed to find him. I tripped then, going face down in the sand, and when I came up, I saw a new message on the wet-looking plasterwood. It was hard to see in the shadows that I sat in, but as I got closer, I put my trembling fingers on it to make sure it was real. My fingers came away tacky, the tips black as if they had touched wet marker. I need you to come get me, Daddy. I'm stuck in the sad swamps, and I need help. Excuse me, sir. Everything all right here? As their flashlights hit me, I squinted, but the words were like a brand across my eyes. The sad swamps was what Dale called the swamps of sorrow from his favorite movie, The Never-Ending Story. We had watched it about 1,000 times, and when the VHS that I had owned as a kid finally broke in the VCR, we had searched for it on DVD until we found it at a local thrift store. He watched it every day before his afternoon nap, and I imagined that he could just about quote it word for word. Seeing the word sad swamps made me certain that it was Dale talking. But how? How could he be talking to me from... The light was right in my face now, and I pulled up a hand to block it. Some of your neighbors were worried. You were faring poorly, Mr. Dawes. They heard you shouting and wanted us to come check on you. They were being kind. It seemed that everyone was being kind these days to poor old drunk Mr. Dawes. But I didn't have time for them. I'd seen something under the edge of the play park, half a word that was buried in the shadows. It was his latest message, and as I staggered towards it a little, I hoped it would tell me how to get to him. What happened? One of them asked in his jovial tone as he leaned down. Why flock you out after you came home snookered? Well, we can get you a place to sleep it off, sir. Never. He had put a hand on my shoulder, but I pulled away from him as I tried to see the words that were written beneath the structure. It was just 6 words, but I couldn't see the last one, and the last one seemed very important. The police grabbed a hold of me, but I fought to get away as I tried to see that last word. I got as close as I could, both catching me under an arm as they pulled me away from the structure, and finally I saw it. I repeated it again and again as they put me in the back of the car, all the fight out of me now, wanting to commit it to memory before my drink-addled brain made a muck of it. "We'll phone the missus and let her know that she can pick you up in the tank, Mr. Dawes. If she don't wanna, then I guess you're sobering up on a bench for the night, so long as you don't try any more of that." I ignored them as we left the parking lot, my flat disappearing behind us as I repeated those 6 words like a mantra. Look for me inside the cave. The police hadn't been wrong. My wife was livid. She came down to the station, her clothes clearly thrown on hastily, and glowered at me through the bars of the holding cell. It was just me in there with a few old gaffers, and they were snoring in a corner as I slouched on the bench. I was still imprinting those words on my brain, mumbling them like a magic spell, when I heard her voice and looked up into her scowling face. "I can't believe you've done this. It isn't enough that you get sent home from work, that you do nothing but blunder around like an old tramp, and that you won't get any help for yourself. But now you go and get yourself tossed in the drunk tank. I'm done, Malcolm. Do you understand me? This is the last straw. I won't stay here and watch you destroy yourself." "He's alive," I rasped out, and when she looked back at me, I saw all the anger leak out of her, only to be replaced with pity. "I miss him too, just as much as you do, but you have to let him go. It's been a year, Malcolm. He's not coming home. It wasn't your fault what happened to him. You have to stop blaming yourself for this. He's been leaving me messages at the play park, Stephanie. I can prove it. Come with me and I'll show you. We can find him. We can be a family again. We can..." But she cut me off with the first sob I'd heard from her in months. "I'm leaving, Malcolm. When they release you in the morning, don't call me. Go back to the flat. Go to your mother's house. Go to hell for all I care. I can't watch you do this anymore." She left me there with the other drunks, but I'd already decided what I had to do. They turned me loose in the morning, and after a brisk walk home, I got the things I'd need. I brought a torch, some string, and a big hunting knife I'd had since I was a teenager, and set off for the play park. It was early morning, and I had the place to myself, save for the pigeons still gobbling at my spilled pie remains. I didn't see any new graffiti, but I didn't need any. I knew where Dale was, and as I got on my hands and knees, I crawled around the playground and into the cave. Even in my assuredness, I felt foolish as I moved into the cave. It was dark, but I could still see the light streaming in from the other side. I didn't feel that same sense of foreboding like I had before. No sense of monsters coming to gobble me up, and I turned on the torch as I checked out the corners. The cave was a box of 4 walls with a roof of thick plastic overhead, and I should have been able to see all 4 walls. 3 of the walls were normal enough, but as I looked to the west-facing wall, I was aware of another opening that led into a space that shouldn't exist. An opening between that led into deeper darkness. As my torch turned against the encroaching blackness, I turned my body in a ponderous circle and started crawling into it. If I meant to get my son back, I would need to hobble into the sad swamp and come out the other side. In contrast to the dark cave behind me, the space I entered was pitch black. The edges of my light curled oddly, the darkness seeming to retreat around the edges like felt as I moved in deeper. I wasn't underground. I was still heading forward, but given the dimensions of the play structure, the place I crawled shouldn't exist. The length was wrong. The longer I crawled, the more I expected to wake up and find that I had fallen asleep in the drunk tank. The space was cramped, but felt vast as it stretched on. It was like an abandoned underground cave, the claustrophobic passage threatening to collapse on me at any minute. Besides being black dark, it was also utterly silent. Besides the crunch of my knees as they moved over the sand, no other sounds seemed to exist. My own labored breathing seemed to be absorbed by that thick midnight around me, and every painful drag of my body sent a spasm of need through me. It was a primal need, a need to stand at my full height and stretch my arms up, a way to dissipate the confining gloom that hung around me. The same part of my brain made it pretty clear, however, how bad an idea that would be. What if my hands should pass into that darkness and never return? What if the darkness came back with the hand? I kept crawling into that inky soup, wondering if I would simply wander here forever. It was pitch outside the protective beam of my torch, and with every struggling shuffle, I wondered why I didn't turn around and go back. Nothing could survive down here. Nothing could live in this pitch blackness. If I didn't go back now, I'd never find my way out, and be forced to wander endlessly in this void until my torch went out. And then what? I knew I wasn't alone when I heard the soft scuff of feet on sand. I looked into the black expanse, expecting to see the beast that had terrified me the last time I found myself in this nothing. The beam of my torch didn't go very far. At the end of the light, I could hear the scuff of bare feet on sand, though. Something was coming towards me, and I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. Would it be my son, or would it be a monster to end my journey? When a dirty, half-starved little boy buried me in a hug that circled my shoulders, I knew I'd found him. "Dale?" I whispered, but he could only nod and cry against me. I didn't waste time or breath. I just scooped him up and didn't stop moving until I was back in the lighted world of the play park. As we moved, I could feel that clawing, penetrating glare from behind me. Something had noticed I was taking its prize, and they were unhappy. I kept crawling, kept pulling, but I could hear those scrabbling feet as they kicked up sand. They were getting closer now, their growl loud and thunderous, and on a whim, I turned my torch on them. Bathed in the light, they yelped wildly and kicked up sand as they backpedaled. I didn't dare look back to see what was tailing me. I put on a burst of speed, crawling like our lives depended on it, and when I collapsed in the light of day, I was aware of people shouting at me to get out of there. Their kids were asking who I was and why I was so dirty, but they must have thought I was a bum. When they saw Dale, they tried to take him from me, but I held on like my life depended on it. And when they finally recognized us, I heard their anger turn to surprise. They took us both to the hospital, and I'm glad to say that aside from being underfed and very dirty, Dale was completely fine. My wife came to the hospital, and we both cried as she apologized for doubting me. I refused it, telling her she had nothing to apologize for. I doubted myself. I fell into the bottle and nearly lost myself in my grief. I should be apologizing to you for putting you through this for the last year. She sat with me at the hospital, both of us afraid to take our eyes off Dale as he sat placidly in his hospital bed. I asked him about what he had gone through, but he couldn't tell me much. He said that he got lost in the cave, and he crawled and crawled until he came out in the play park again. Only it wasn't his play park. The play park he found was different, and me and his friends were gone. The sky was sort of purple, and the clouds were too thick-looking to be real. I couldn't get the gate open, but that was probably good. There were these big things that would come by like living shadows, and they would look at me like I was an animal in the zoo. I drank some water from a gross puddle, but there was no food. Sometimes I went to sleep in the cave, but I always felt like something was watching me in there. It never tried to hurt me, but it always felt like I was hiding and waiting for someone to catch me. I thought I was going to starve before I heard you breathing in the cave. I had to run away to get away from some shadow people who were looking for me, and I heard you down there and went to see what the sound was. I asked him about the messages, and he said he had found some kind of marker in the sand over there, and that was about the time he started seeing a shadow inside the play park. I knew it was you. Somehow I just knew it was you, but you couldn't see me. So I started writing messages, hoping you would see them. I guess you found them. The strangest part is that Dale swears he was only there for a week. He says he kept going back into the cave, but he only slept a few times while he was away. What's more, the doctors say he doesn't appear to have grown in the time he was gone. His dental records and growth structure are the same as when he had a checkup about a month before he disappeared. I'm glad to have Dale back, but I don't let him play in the cave anymore. We still visit the play park, and I still let him slide on the slides and run on the structure like he used to, but he's forbidden to go underneath anymore. It's a rule he doesn't mind following, lest he get lost in those dark tunnels for a second time. The celebration of Purga Rinvadaro was a celebration that was highly anticipated in my town. The celebration is always capped off by the hunting of the mice, which was the highlight of the event. On the first day of the feast, we opened the door to find 3 masks attached to our doorknob. This occurred year after year for as long as I could remember, and I didn't think it was strange at all. Every year we would open the door, find the cat masks, long, wiry whiskers and pointy black ears, hanging from the doorknob to our home. There would be one for my mother, one for my father, and one for me. We would wear them at the festival, riding the rides and playing the games, lifting them only slightly to eat food at the feast as we gave praise to Saint Rocher. This year, however, was special for me. I was 13, old enough to do a day's work if I chose, old enough to have my own money and to have my own responsibilities, old enough to participate in what came after the feast, old enough to participate in the Purga de Ratas. I had always watched from the windows of the council hall with the other children as the people in the cat masks went about freeing us from the rats. You could see them sometimes, the big rats with their pointed noses and coarse whiskers, running through the streets as the cats turned them from wherever they had been hiding. I asked Mother what they were. They were larger than the rats I had seen in the pantry on occasions, and she had told me that these were the undesirables, those who Saint Rocher had chosen to purge from the community, and that it was the job of the town to become his cats and free the community of them. I asked her once if we could be chosen by Saint Rocher to be purged on that night. She told me I'd better pray it never happened. Those who were purged during the Purga de Ratas were cursed and removed from the town after they were destroyed. This was the year I would discover what that truly meant. I went to the festival in my mask, excited for the night to come. As I played the games, danced the Danza de Ratha, and ate at the feast, I couldn't help but think of taking to the streets with my father and mother that night to help purge the unclean from our town. Mother had said that they were Saint Rocher's enemies, said that her father had said they were filled with spirits who had brought the plague to our city when she was a girl. If they didn't purge all of them, they would bring it there again. I was excited to go out and bring honor to my family as I drove these rats out of the city, but I was a little scared too. It was that feeling you get just before doing something dangerous and exciting, like riding a wild horse. You fear the action, but you can't wait for the ride. I was a little sad, though. My friend Maria wasn't there. She never missed the festival, and not seeing her made me wonder if she was sick. Her father wasn't a nice man, my father said. He didn't support the festival, and he had tried to argue for having it canceled many times. He always seemed nice to me when I visited Maria, but I knew well enough not to argue with my father. I didn't see Maria all day, and as we went home with the setting sun, I hoped I would see her tonight. We returned home and ate at the midnight feast that my parents always ate before it was time to go to the night's work. I tucked in greedily, knowing that I would need my strength for what was to come. God help me. I was so young, I didn't know what was in store for me. As we ate, I asked my mother about the people who didn't go to the festival. She looked critically, asking what I meant. I told her I saw someone peeking through the windows of their home. They'd moved away from the window quickly, but I had marked them by their whiskers and their beady eyes. Mother said that those people were not to be trusted, and that clearly they had been infested by the spirits Saint Rocher wanted us to expel from the city that night. I nodded, making a note of that house in my mind. Their house was close to ours, and my parents and I could get there easily and chase them out. When the deep thrum of the midnight bell tolled, Father donned his mask and led us to the kitchen. There would be no need to take me to the chapel for safekeeping that night. He handed each of us a knife from the knife block, saving the sharpest knife for me. It was a long, curved fillet knife, and he told me not to be afraid to swing it hard. These aren't people anymore, and we must expunge the plague from the city. I nodded, not understanding entirely, but I soon would. We left the house, and I took them to the house I had seen earlier, seeing the other cats as they moved through the city. They were moving in clusters, groups of 5 or 10, and soon we would be taken into the Clouder easily. The other cats around me were a comfortable weight, all of them people I knew, though I didn't know that I knew them. They followed us as we went, letting us lead them to the rats. The lights were off when we approached, the house dark and the windows shuttered. I figured this would be the time that we would scare the mice out of their holes. I'd seen my kitten, Georgette, scare mice out of their holes before. She would pretend to be interested in one hole, and then when the mice would poke their heads out of the other hole and come hesitantly out, she would dash at them and scare them out of the house. She would run them and run them. Her little kitten energy was boundless, until Mother finally saw them, swept them out with her broom, crying, "Purgadoratus," as she swept them from our house. But we were no kittens, it seems, and this city did not hunt like that. The stone made me jump when it crashed through the window. The window shattered inward, and I heard someone shriek. We had scared the rats, and now they would come running out. But this was also how kittens hunted. Several of the cats, the ones with clubs as well as knives, cleared the glass out of the window and climbed through easily. The shrieks from inside were undoubtedly more human than mouse-like, but when the door burst open, one of the rats ran for it, just like the rats at home. No broom came out to sweep him away. The Clouder fell on him, and I saw his hands come up to reach as the knives came down. I stopped as I saw what they were doing, feeling a little sick, as I saw the blood leaking from the rat. He was bigger than I had expected, bigger than me, and he twitched as he lay there. I took a step back, not really wanting to get close, but my mother pushed me forward as her hands stopped my retreat. I looked back into her cat mask and saw her gentle eyes as she pushed me again. "Go on, honey. Get a cut in." I stepped forward, some of my excitement dulled by fear, and saw the gurgling rat looking up at me as it bled onto the cobbles. Its black eyes stared at me, and it coughed wetly, though its lips didn't move. I held my knife in a shaky hand, preparing to strike, when the rat suddenly reached out for me, locking its hand around my ankles. My fear gripped me, and I suddenly stabbed out with the knife. I stabbed the rat again and again and again, closing my eyes as I stabbed his arm, his back, his neck. The hand went limp as he flopped onto the cobbles. The Clouder cheered, and we were off again. We ran, drunk off our own power, and found a pair of rats in the street as they dodged another group. They were cutting down an alley as we came upon them, but they looked up at our group as it came close. One of them took off down the alley, but the other just stood there, frozen in terror, as the Clouder fell on her. She screamed as we stabbed her, but I broke off to pursue the other one as they finished stabbing and beating her. I didn't want her to get away, and my blood was up. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want one of the rats for myself, too. I ran after her, leaving the others behind, and found her just as she hit the wall of the alley. She turned, seeing me, and started looking around fitfully. I could almost taste her fear as I closed in, knife at the ready. I, too, would purge my town of rats. "Please," she begged, and her words gave me pause. She was speaking. Did rats speak? None of the rats I'd ever seen spoke. Of course, none of the rats I had ever seen were big either. The speaking rat made me falter for a moment, and she took full advantage of this as she tried to reason with me. Please don't hurt me. I'll give you whatever you want. I just don't want to die." I heard the Clowder coming up behind me, yelling as they came, and their presence gave me strength. I ran forward, and I shoved the knife at her, the blade sinking into her abdomen as she tried to back away. As it went in, I yelled, "Purga de ratas!" and I could see her dress starting to redden as her hands gripped the knife. She cut her fingers, and she fell to her knees as the Clowder came into the alley with a shout of mirth. I pulled the knife out and ran to my father. He pulled me into his arms and whispered, "You're a natural." At that moment, I was so proud. My family was doing something special, and we were united. Sometimes it almost felt like we lived on our own, only seeing each other for dinner. But now we were doing something we could all enjoy, and I couldn't wait till next year. I didn't have the slightest idea what I was doing, but I would soon find out. I followed the Clowder, growing bolder as we went, until we came to the next house. They pounded on the door, yelling for the rats to come out and face their fate. Everyone else was waiting expectantly, waiting for the door to open so they could charge the house and kill these rats. I was confused, though. There must have been a mistake. This couldn't be the rats' house. They were looking for rocks to break the window, but I just shook my head and felt my confusion mount. This couldn't be the right house. This was Maria's house. The door opened suddenly, and Maria's father stepped out onto the stoop. He wasn't wearing a mask. His face was set in a stoic cast, and he raised his rifle and pointed it at the mob. Some of them backed away, but most of them only seemed to take more pleasure from his presence. They mumbled to themselves, gripping their knives and preparing to charge. Maria's father cast his gaze around at them, his eyes falling on me for a moment before sliding away. "I'm not wearing that damn mask. This whole celebration is an abomination. If you mean to take my family, then you can come and try. I'll take a few of you with me. Just remember, which of you will be wearing a rat mask next year?" I backed away from the Clowder, slowly, my knife hitting the cobbles. No one noticed the metallic sound, or the scream that followed it as the rifle blammed loudly. One of the cats had charged him, thinking he wouldn't shoot, and now he lay bleeding on his doorstep. The gun went off again a moment later, but I didn't see who had been killed that time. I was running, head down, my mask forgotten, as I turned from the carnage that I now understood was not a magic festival or a fight for our town from giant rats. We were killing our friends, our neighbors, and I would never understand why. I ran as the tears streamed down my face, and I didn't stop running until the sounds of rats and cats were behind me. I ran until the woods enveloped me, the lush fairy tale woods that seemed to surround our home. The trees whipped at me, the roots pulled at me, and I just kept running. I ran from the horror, from the chaos, and I didn't stop until the ground went out from under me. Suddenly I was tumbling, I was rolling down something, and I put my hands up to my face to protect myself. I was so confused, so frightened, and when I hit my head on something, my vision got very blurry. I kept rolling, struggling to maintain my consciousness. I was slapping against the bushes and banging against small rocks, and when I finally came to a rest, I felt warm, solid ground beneath me. When the lights engulfed me, leaving me in a warm circle, I passed out. I woke up in a hospital. The nurses said I had been found lying on a major highway, a truck driver having brought me here after calling the police. I'd been unconscious for a while, a day at least, and I had a pretty massive head wound that would need to heal. The doctor said I had a small skull fracture and that I definitely had a concussion. They kept me for a month, most of which was trying to get me to tell them who I was and where I was from. I feigned memory loss. The women in Mother's books lost their memories sometimes after an accident. I did not want to go back home. I knew for a fact that if I went home, after running away from the festival, that my family might very well find rat masks on their door next year. I also didn't want to face the wrath of my parents and my community. No one refused to participate in the festival, or, like Maria's father, they were made to play the rats. After a month, I was sent to an orphanage where I was adopted. The country I'm from doesn't have the best track record when it comes to placing children into foster homes, or even having them adopted by good families, but I suppose I got lucky. Glenda and Mark were from the United States, here to do missionary work. When Glenda heard about my story, she became interested in me. She said that it seemed to be God's will that she help me, and they adopted me right then and there. They stayed for a few years, helping me get back on my feet, and when they went home, they helped me gain citizenship and become a United States citizen. I moved with them to San Diego and attended college. I never told them about my village, or the Perga Rinvadaro, and they never pushed me. I think they suspected that my amnesia was self-inflicted, and they're honestly the best parents I ever could have asked for. I'm 30 now, married with a new baby in a place of my own. My husband, Marco, is a wonderful father, and we couldn't be happier. He works as a civil engineer for a large company, and I work as a nurse when I'm not at home with Hugo. Glenda and Mark, my mom and dad, are always welcome at our house, and I can't imagine a better life than the one I have. A life that my past is threatening to take away. You see, when I went to get the mail today, I noticed something hanging on the door of our apartment. I saw the masks, laughing and thinking it was a Halloween thing from the neighbors. But when I picked them up, the wiry whiskers stuck painfully into my hand. I dropped them and stared in horror. They were masks, all right. 3 of them, and they all were gray lacquered faces of rats. The whiskers were frayed metal wires, and the nose of one had been broken in the fall, a delicate black bulb that now lay on the pavement beside the mask. There were 3 masks, as I said, and the third was the one that filled me with the most dread. 2 were normal-sized, easily capable of fitting an adult face, but the third was small, delicate, the eyes carved to make it look scared and sad. A mask for a baby. There was a note inside one, and I thought I would tear it as my shaking hands reached out to open it. The paper was rough, handmade, and the ink was thick and blocky. The village made its own paper, its own ink, and rarely traded with others. I had no doubt that the masks had been made by the same old man that used to make them every year. I felt the tears come on, and as I read the note, the concrete bit into my knees as I went down to them to sob into the paper. The note read, "Joyous Perga Rinvadaro. Join us this evening for the Perga de Ratas. If you cannot attend, don't worry. We will bring the celebration to you."